Valencia 1, Real Madrid 3. Let's welcome Sid Lowe into the show, shall we? Sid, first question, I suppose. Does anyone care about this?
I mean, look, this game, this set of games obviously have been surrounded by all sorts of controversy, not least, of course, the fact that it's being played in Saudi Arabia at all. It's a tournament that, according to the president of the federation, was dying before, when it was just a one-off match or two head-to-head two matches between the cup winners and the league winners. I'm not sure that's entirely true. This has, in terms of the format at least, created a certain degree of interest. But I'm not sure. I think if we get a Clasico final, I think people will care. But it's still, everybody knows that this is, if you like, the most important of the friendlies or the least important of the competitive games, either way you want to look at it.
Barca, of course, taking on Atleti tomorrow in the other semi-final. Sid, looking at it, though, as a game, Real Madrid continuing to prove how much they have improved over the last couple of months.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's always difficult, isn't it, after a game where one team dominates so much to be able to put your finger on how much it's Valencia playing poorly, how much it's Real Madrid playing well. But I think the fact that, as you introduced it in these terms, this is part of a continuity of performance from Real Madrid. They played, I thought, quite poorly away at Getafe, but defensively were very strong. They were very serious. There's that element to their game now. I think there's a competitive edge to them, perhaps, that wasn't there before. And the main thing that really stands out is the way that Zidane has recovered a whole load of players that we'd almost given up on. And you mentioned Isco earlier. Isco tonight had 102 touches, the most he's ever had in a Real Madrid game, playing in a midfield role where everyone in midfield was rotating and using the ball and moving and covering for each other. And it's a completely different formation, without Bale, without Benzema, players missing, and yet somehow it feels like there's just a confidence running through Madrid now that means even when they don't play well, they're always competitive, and they do look very good.
Yeah, they're looking much, much better.
They are. And what you consider in today's match, and the thing that would jump out at you when you see the starting lineup is essentially you got five midfielders and you have Jovic in front of them, but the rotation that Sid was just mentioning, and Isco with a free role, and Modric also popping into a free role, and then Toni Kroos with his ability to keep the pace of the game, Valverde with athleticism, and Casemiro always doing the job that he does. And you see that rotation and you see that movement, and it's such a departure from what we have expected Real Madrid to be over the last couple of seasons, where you know you're going to have two wingers, and you're going to have, in this case, this year, Hazard on one side, maybe Bale on the other side, say Vinicius. That's a conversation. Who's going to play out in the wing, and then Benzema out in front? This was a different look for Real Madrid, and one that just completely dominated the possession of the game, the pace of the game, the rhythm with which the game was played, and the confidence that is coming back from a lot of the players that, as just Sid alluded to. Has anybody had two phases to their career in Real Madrid more so than Isco, where he was left for dead, and then Zidane came in, and then he was playing. And then he was left for dead again, and then he's back playing. And if you have that from 3 or 4 players in Real Madrid, that kind of talent rises to a different level entirely. And that's why it makes Real Madrid, when you project as to what the future of La Liga is going to be, of course it's going to be Real Madrid or Barcelona. But right now, you feel like the inside track is Real Madrid.
You mentioned Sid mentioned the touches for Isco, but I got the feeling it was a little bit of a training game.
Yeah.
Feel about it.
Yeah.
And in some sense, taking it to Saudi Arabia or another country, but it's Saudi Arabia, it sort of took the intensity away from it. It felt like it's a trip. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For Valencia, but even for Real Madrid, and it's a trip with a game involved rather than a semi-final. And I kind of got the feeling and that allowed Real Madrid just to dominate the game. And I think Valencia were all right now and again, but I just feel taking the games to these places, you lose the intensity of having the game on home soil where it kind of means more. It's almost like, well, we're over here and we're playing this little game in Saudi Arabia because that's what we're doing. And it's a bit of a trip.
Yeah.
And if we win, we win. I mean, obviously for Real Madrid and Barcelona, the pressure is more. But for the other teams, I think it's taken the edge off it.
Sid, we've come a long way, though, haven't we, from that pre-season shellacking that Real Madrid received from Atleti. There was talk on the show, I know, we talked about the future of Zinedine Zidane and how he could be gone before Christmas. He must He must be smiling to himself because he's shown a lot of his critics wrong, hasn't he, over the last few weeks, proving that he's not just a manager who will just pat you on the back.
Yeah, I mean, he must be smiling to himself, not least because he always seems to be smiling. That's been part of his ability over the last 4 years, because it was 4 years ago, just a few days ago that he took over. I mean, how much he's done in 4 years. Won 3 Champions Leagues, gone away, come back, and now seems to have somehow put the team back together. Because, of course, he came back and he had those last 12 games of last season where it was just everyone waiting for the end. And it felt like that could have actually really burnt him. And he's come through it. And as you say, there was the defeat against Atletico in the summer. There was a doubtful start to the season. And you know what? I think the smile, it doesn't feel like he's driven by what people say, but it does feel like he's driven by a competitiveness, I think more than anything else, to prove to himself and to prove to his players that he can do it differently. And I think one of the most interesting things about this year is that it feels like their priorities have been turned on their head at Real Madrid. Zidane has been consistent in talking about the league, consistent in talking about this is what proves that we are the best, not the Champions League. And, you know, it is not, it's no fantasy to say that the president of the club would much rather win the Champions League, to the extent that he told one of his former managers, oh, don't worry about the league, we've got to win the Champions League. And yet Zidane has shifted that, and he's challenged the storyline from within the club. And I think we're seeing that now in the competitiveness of the players, the seriousness of them. And to go back to the Getafe game at the weekend again, and I think this is a microcosm of their season. They didn't play well with the ball. They weren't good, but they scored 3 goals. But what they were was incredibly competitive up against a really tough, really aggressive, occasionally nasty team. And said, OK, we're going to play like this, are we? We'll play. Last year, they wouldn't have done.
How surprised are you that Zidane's managed to pull this off? Obviously, he hasn't done anything yet with regards to...
Oh, yeah,
sorry, Real Madrid TV hat off.
just about to pull you in there.
Well, not surprised. I mean, Sid just mentioned the success that he has had. And when people just kind of said and dismissed it as, well, you know what he is? He's just a man manager.
Yeah.
No, there's more to it. And you have to be a man manager, and you have to handle certain situations. But then you also have to make tactical decisions. And you have to evaluate players, and you have to say, this guy gives me an opportunity to win. So when you identify Valverde as a guy who's going to be an important part of your team going forward, that's taking a chance, because that's taking the position of somebody else, somebody who has been far more established, where you're saying, no, you know what? This young guy is the answer for me. Zidane's got to make that decision, not anybody else. And so I do think that Zidane deserves a whole lot of credit, but then he's got to finish the deal. Right. And so does this team.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.